Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this session of the 2023 Six Bridges Book Festival. My name is Frederick McKindra, and tonight I will be moderating the discussion with writer De'Shawn Charles Winslow. De'Shawn Charles Winslow is the author of Decent People and In West Mills. In West Mills was a Center for Fiction First Novel Prize winner, an American Book Award recipient, and a Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction winner, and a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Lambda Literary and Publishing Triangle Awards. He was born and raised in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and graduated from the Iowa Writers Workshop. De'Shawn's latest novel, Decent People, returns us to the environs of his debut in West Mills, North Carolina. Mr. Winslow expands on some of the ideas in his first novel, like how small Southern towns deal with the peculiarities of their inhabitants. But this time he works through the genre conventions of a murder mystery. Dr. Marion Harmon, the town's only Black doctor, along with her sister Marva and her brother Lazarus, have all been shot dead in the family home. Their estranged half-brother, Olympus Seymour, or Limp, is suspected of having committed the murder. Limp's fiance and recent town re-arrival, Joe Wright, sets out to clear Limp of the murders and uncovers much about the workings of her hometown, West Mills. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This evening, the Six Bridges Book Festival is sponsored by the Arkansas Humanities Council and the Little Rock Convention and Visitors Bureau, along with many others. If interested in purchasing Decent People, please check out the two independent bookstores working with Six Bridges this year, Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing, and Wordsworth Bookstore. You can purchase the novel through the website of either store. Links to their sites will be posted in the chat during the discussion. Also, if you have a question for Mr. Winslow, please feel free to drop it into the webinar's chat, and we will pose those questions to Mr. Winslow once we conclude our discussion this evening. So I will turn it over to De'Shawn. De'Shawn, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. I'm looking forward.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, of course. All right.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in with us tonight, and thanks again, Frederick, for inviting me. I wish I could be there in person, but thank God for Zoom and all these technologies that we have now. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the book, kind of a broad sweep, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the section, the few pages that I'm going to read here. So the novel is about the Harmon family. They get murdered. That's, as Frederick mentioned, their half-brother is on the hook for it. But his fiance, Joe, learns that there were at least 3 other people who had it out for the Harmons for various reasons. And so what the novel does is it spends time with those other people as well. They're not exactly suspects, and that's, the reader learns that right away, but they are people who had reason to, and the question becomes not not did they do it, but why did they have such, such venom for for the three deceased victims? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a few pages from Savannah's section. Savannah was the best friend of one of the victims. She was the best friend of Marva Harmon, who was the doctor's younger sister. Vanna Temple Russett's two sons were all she had, and she would do anything to protect them. But she had let down her guard and trusted someone else briefly with their care. She could only hope Terrence and Troy would someday forget how poorly Marion Harmon had treated them, how she sought to use them to inflict harm. And Savannah would never tell the boys that Marva Harmon, the person she believed to be her best friend in the world, and, Terrence and Troy thought of her as an aunt, had been unwilling to stand up for them. Savannah didn't blame Eunice Loving one bit for confronting Marion, whether privately or at a place of business, for bullying Leroy. Savannah, too, had cause for anger toward the Harmon sisters. But my God, Eunice, did you kill them? Savannah looked at the clock on her nightstand. The Harmons' memorial service was set to begin in an hour, and she was still sitting on her bed, back against the headboard, crying and trying to smoke a cigarette without dropping it and burning her sheets. If Terrence and Troy had not brought her a toasted waffle and a half a glass of orange juice, she might not have had the strength to sit upright. Next to the clock sat the old empty Tylenol bottle where Savannah used to hide the Valium. She felt as though the mildest of withdrawal symptoms would kill her. But this wasn't new to her. She had gone through it years ago, just before moving back to West Mills from New York. Savannah hadn't had a pill in almost a week, having run out the day after the Harmons were found dead. A damn crime, she had thought when she realized she had taken the last one. She knew she would need at least one to get through the memorial service, and one would certainly come in handy in a couple of days when she would go to the county clerk's office to ask for another extension on the property tax bill. The house where she, Terrence, and Troy lived, the same house they had moved into after returning to West Mills, was a godsend. Mortgage-free, but oh, the taxes. Sometimes Savannah wondered if she was better off renting. Savannah couldn't bring herself to look at the notice again. It too occupied space on her nightstand. It was printed on yellow paper as if it brought joyful news of some sort. If the payment wasn't made within 10 days, the marshal would be there to install padlocks. Then where would they go? Not across the canal to the east side, where her father and grandmother would say, "We told you not to marry him." But none of that mattered today. She had a service to attend. With what feelings exactly, Savannah couldn't say. It was a strange notion, paying respect to someone who had been your best friend and then your enemy. Even so, one thing remained undeniable. Savannah missed her badly. "Come on, Savannah," she whispered to herself, looking across the room into the mirror. She had to sweep her long blonde hair to the back of her head to see her own face. "Get up, get moving." The boys didn't want to go to the memorial service with her. She didn't blame them, but she was still shaken by the murders, and there was no way she was leaving them home alone, not with a killer on the loose. Whether it was Limp Seymour, Eunice, or someone else, Savannah couldn't be sure. Regardless, the boys would have to be mad at her. She would make them join her at the church. Thank you.
Thank you so much, De'Shawn. That was a wonderful reading, and thank you for showing us some of the incidental characters of the novel. Really interesting. Savannah's inclusion in the town of West Mills was really interesting to me. Yeah, but we'll get to that. I have a lot of questions. And so I want to sort of start by asking you a bit about place. I know a lot of people, especially when fiction writers invent towns, a lot of people want to know about what sort of inspires the writer to want to make a place
Mhm.
and to think about a particular setting. And so Decent People, and to some extent in West Mills, your first novel, felt somewhat like the history of a group of people I knew existed, but hadn't really heard much about, by which
Mhm.
I mean Southern transplants to New York City. Marion, Marva, and Lazarus, Joe and Herschel, her brother, and even Savannah and Fitz, all at some point in their lives migrated north to New York City from North Carolina. Um,
Mhm.
the migration of African Americans along the East Coast sort of gets subsumed by the narratives of so many migrations to New York, even among Black people, given the treks of many Caribbean and African peoples. So, how much of writing West Mills, North Carolina into existence is about giving voice to that community of Black people that migrated from the Carolinas north?
A lot of it. So West Mills is based on a real town called South Mills, and it's my mother's hometown, and it's right next door to Elizabeth City, where I grew up. You know,
Mhm.
like I'm still. Sometimes I say this should just be one big city because South Mills uses Elizabeth City's grocery stores, Elizabeth City's
Mhm.
hospitals. You know, it's just a county line that divides it. An invisible line. But yeah, the reason I didn't set either of the books in the real town of South Mills is because I was getting really distracted and caught up with real historical context.
Mhm.
And I was spending time flying home or driving home from at the time I was in New York and going through to the courthouse and looking, oh, who was the richest white man in town during then? Because I got to use his name, and all this stuff. And I was just like, listen, just change the name of the town, you know. But in terms of the migration, the northern migration, the reason why that's so a part of my work so far is because so many of my family members migrated north and came. So I would say maybe half of them came back. So for example, my mother's parents, they both moved to New York. They would go to New York, they would have a baby, and they would bring the baby back to the South to my great grandmother
Oh, wow.
and be like, look after them. Look after them while we can make this money,
Yeah.
And he had 9 children, and I think the second, the I think the last 5 were born in New York.
Oh, wow.
And so they would just kind of do this back and forth thing. And I think my grandmother, they split, and my grandfather stayed in New York, and my grandmother came back in like her early 50s. But so I had that to work with, and even my mother told me about my great it would be great great aunts and uncles who she would have been a kid when they were around, but she told me that most of them lived in New York and Philadelphia, you know,
Mm.
and they would come home once a year and this sort of thing. So I just grew up hearing these stories about Aunt so and so and Uncle so and so, and I'd be like, I never met these people, and they would be like, well, yeah, they live in Philadelphia, or they lived in Philadelphia, or they lived in Harlem, Queen, wherever.
Yeah.
But it was so anyway, I just have carried that around with me. And then I did the same thing. I turned 23 and I said, I'm going to New York like all my ancestors.
Right.
you know.
Right.
And so that's all, it's all baked in there. But I did with Decent People, I wanted to think about how we don't hear about it as much, but white people migrate up too. Not I think not as many, I think, because I'm assuming so many white people in the South had more resources in the South and didn't need to migrate.
Right.
But in,
Right.
in Savannah's case, because she married interracially, they had to go somewhere where they would be a little bit more socially accepted. Yeah.
Mhm.
But I don't think
Mhm.
she would have moved if she hadn't married a black man.
Right. Right.
hmm
So interesting. Okay, so I was really excited when I got to Eunice Loving's chapters. and realized that I knew her. I don't think until that point in the novel did I realize that she had recurred as a character from In West Mills. So, what are the particular challenges and pressures, and perhaps even the rewards of working within a fictive world like that with characters and backstories and anecdotes that are being reprised?
hmm It was, I enjoyed writing Eunice. I think she was probably the easiest. She was the
Mm,
easiest to write. And I think that's largely because I already had a framework from her from In West Mills. She didn't take up a lot of space in West Mills, but we knew who she was. We knew how people thought, what people thought of her, you
mhm,
know. And
mhm,
so it just allowed me to kind of just flesh out that skeleton
mhm,
character.
mhm,
And I was even able to look at, there's a scene, a flashback scene in Decent People where her birth mother comes over to visit to try to basically apologize for not having raised her. And her
mhm,
husband is like, she doesn't need your apology. She's good,
mhm.
And that scene happens in West Mills. And I just kind of I changed it and made it from the point of view of Eunice listening to it,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it was good. It saved me some time,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
got to kind of rewrite that scene very closely to the original, but just from somebody else's point of view.
Yeah.
And so that was fun. So I tell writers, reuse your characters,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know?
Which I guess I as aspiring novelist sort of know that that's not something you see all the time. Sometimes
Right.
oftentimes I feel like novelists are saying, once I close the book, it's done and I want to put it away. But you seem quite comfortable sort of reprising characters that you've already, and maybe that feels like it's tied to your interest in genealogy, and
hmm
sort of thinking through character in terms of real people and
Yeah.
how people's histories sort of follow them, which is
Right.
interesting to me.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
There have been times, especially, I don't think I would do this now, but when In West Mills came out, at some point I was like, almost every character I could just keep writing books set in West Mills, and
mhm.
all of these characters that I introduced would have their own novel. That would be a lot of books set in
That
West
would
Mills.
be.
And I don't
Yeah,
think I'm gonna do that. But that's
yeah.
how much I wanted to delve into these various people's lives.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. So cool. Um, I'm curious, do you feel any trepidation about writing female characters as a male author? Because you've done it so frequently and you do it so well, I wondered if there was an special affinity you felt toward writing that person.
hmm In terms of the trepidation, yeah, from the
Okay.
first, from the when I first started drafting in West Mills, I was like, am I gonna get in trouble? For
Right.
writing this, there's a male character and a female character, but I definitely, not in West Mills, not is like the main character. And then, when I got to Decent People, I was like, well, I have more female characters than male. But I had to kind of let that fear go. I know that there will always be readers and other writers who say, nope, men should stay in their lane, women should stay in their lane, or whatever. And I do agree with that argument in some identity cases, obviously. You know what I'm saying? um, to a degree. But I was like, but you know what? I feel like I spent my most of my life, most of my childhood around women. So women's voices come to me much easier than a
Hmm.
straight male, you know?
Hmm.
And I was like, I have to be true to myself. Otherwise, I'm gonna write a book from a male point of view. And I'm gonna write a book from a male point of view, and it's gonna seem not stereotypical, but it's gonna seem stock. It's gonna seem like the average straight Black man in North Carolina. And because I'm just going to be grasping at generalities. And so I
Hmm.
just, what, I do what feels comfortable and what I feel I can do convincingly. you
Right.
know, and
Right.
I have decided to let go of that critic that, that critic in the back of my mind is like, you're a dude, you can't
Mhm.
keep writing women. Yes, I can.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm going to, and I'll write men too, but I'm not going to stop writing women because it comes to me, you know.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
That's so funny. I feel like a part of this session is me just processing my own fears and questions.
I hear you.
What
It's
do you
fine.
do? That's so funny. So I'm curious about um you taking on the genre conventions of a murder mystery. I guess I asked you before the session started whether or not you felt any fears about um working in a genre. And so I guess I want to expand on that question a little by asking what, if any, antecedents did you look to? Were there any novels, literary or not, that you thought would sort of help you along in the process? I'm really curious specifically about the idea to present splitting the narrators, and so
Uh-huh.
giving everybody their own chapter, whether or not you've seen that work anywhere, and how did you sort of happen up on that form for the novel?
Hmm. Yeah. So first, what helped me, or what sort of led me to turn the book into a mystery, because it wasn't going to be a mystery originally,
Mm,
was um, it was a form of writer's block. It wasn't that I couldn't come up with things to write, um, but the stakes were low because
mm,
the Harmon's deaths were not a murder; they were accidental, and it was
mm,
people reflecting on their relationships with the Harmons,
right.
and my original editor loved that idea. She was like, "That doesn't need to be a murder," and I was like, "But when I turned in the draft and it was a murder mystery, I was like, that was the only way it was going to get written if I did something, Um, but
Mhm.
this was, it was during the time, the early years of COVID. I was watching a lot of like old TV just to kind of pass the day when I wasn't teaching or something. And I was
Mhm.
watching a lot of mystery TV,
Mhm.
Murder She Wrote, Father Dowling mystery, stuff that I had watched as a kid, Matlock.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was like, well, I can't write the book like a TV show. I'm not a
Mhm.
screenwriter. So I do need to go and like find a mystery or two.
Mhm.
And so what I did was I bought one mystery because I'm like, I'm not reading 12 mysteries or more. And so I read one mystery that's set in London. And I was like, well, you know what? Village in London is very similar to West Mills. These were all white people,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they had very different motivations for, why they were killing people and all this kind of stuff. But I said, you
Mhm.
know what? I'm going to use this novel. And I didn't even read it all. To be honest, I didn't even read it all because what I was concerned with was when do you introduce the murder? When do you start to introduce who could possibly be the killers? I was
Mhm.
looking for I was looking for a craft book, essentially,
Mhm. Mhm.
without using an actual craft book. And so basically, to answer your question, I read 70% of one mystery to kind of help me with pacing. And I guess what? I still got the pacing wrong. but it but at least it let me know that there had to be careful pacing,
Right,
and which I
right,
cleaned up in edits, of course. But
right.
yeah, it was scary, but it was fun at the same time.
Mhm.
And I was like, I gotta have a plot. I gotta
Mhm.
get this book finished for practical reasons.
Mhm.
I was like, I
Mhm.
have to get this book finished. But I'm so glad that I did. Like, there were a couple of times when I was like, okay, I'm gonna remove the murder because I'm not a murder mystery and I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
But then I was like, nope, you're in there now. Just
yeah.
see it through.
Gotta
Yeah.
do it. That's right. That's right.
Hmm.
So Decent People works through some pretty thorny issues of race. in Southern life, but not without humanizing the white characters who enjoy the race privilege, which I thought was a really interesting and sort of novel way of a Black writer approaching race in a Southern town. So I wondered how early in the novel's development did the idea to present various characters' perspectives and to give them their own chapters come to you? And was that sort of helped along by the idea that, oh, if I allow, say, for instance, Savannah or Savannah's dad, Mr. Temple, to have their own chapters, that will help to humanize those characters
Hmm.
because it
Yeah,
really worked effectively, I thought. So,
thank you. Thank you. I'm
mhm,
glad that it did. I I made that decision kind of early on
mhm,
because if I hadn't given all of them their own POVs, if I had written the book purely through Joe's eyes,
mhm,
then I just kind of feel like we may have gotten some Southern stock white characters. And
mhm,
and it's so easy to write a 60-year-old white racist man, you know,
mhm,
like that would have
mhm,
just been easy. And I feel like I would have
mhm,
been borrowing him from every every novel about Southern racism, you know? And um and so I said, you know what? I want to give these characters, I want to show their messiness, but
mhm,
I also want to show the possibility that they are not messy 24 hours a day, 7 days
mhm,
a week, you know? Um, and
mhm.
that even if they are, there's some awareness of it, and
Right,
that sometimes they know what they're doing is wrong. You
right,
know? So I
right.
wanted to, I was really, I wanted, I wanted to do that. I wanted to
Mhm,
give them, I guess, I wanted to give them equal space to be human.
mhm.
Even though I know people will argue they wouldn't do the same. These characters wouldn't do the same for people of color. you know,
Right.
and I know that that's probably true. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I wanted to do that. That was a challenge for me, and I also, I told an anecdote at an event earlier this year that when I was a little boy, there was a man. He was a much older white man who lived down the road, and he had a little candy store and stuff. It was a gas station for a while, and then he closed the pumps down. And his name was Mr. Logan. And Mr. Logan was so nice to us black kids, and he showed genuine. We weren't just his customers. Like he asked us, "How are you doing in school? What grade are you in now?" You know, and oh, you're in such and such grade. That means you're learning multiplication. Are you doing them? Tell me, but 5 times 5. Like he like was interested in us,
Mhm.
and he asked us because we could walk to his place without adult supervision. It was pretty safe, and he would say, "Does your mom still work at such and such?" And your dad, like he knew about us. We weren't
Yeah.
just some black kids that come and
Yeah.
buy his stale candy. And
Mhm.
so, but when I got older, my mom said to me, she said, "Stop spending." And by this time, I wasn't going to the store much anyway. But she was like, "Stop spending money at Logan's. He's a Klansman." And I was like, "He ain't no Klansman." And she said, "Yes, he is.
Wow.
Logan is a Klansman." And I was like, "No, no." I said, "Ma, you think everybody is a Klansman?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Nope, he's a real one. He's an actual Klansman. And
Wow.
yeah, and it never, and it always, I think I did stop going to the store after that point, because she demanded it. But it just, what it, what I've always remembered about Mr. Logan is while there's a huge possibility that he burned some crosses in some black people's yards or
Mhm.
may even have done worse,
Mhm.
he treated us like we were just kids that he was curious about. And so
Wow.
it always makes me wonder, not just about him, but about a lot of people who are racist or part of racist organizations. Do some of them are they do they do it because that's what they were told as a young kid? We are white, they are black, we treat them poorly. You
Mhm.
know, like
Mhm.
and do they do it because they need to fit in for their own livelihood and their own
Mhm.
happiness? It just, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So I kind of, when I was writing Ted, I was thinking a lot about Logan,
Wow.
Mr. Logan. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
so fascinating that you say that, because I think that um expressing that duality is something that Southerners recognize, I think, intimately.
Yeah.
The knowing that a person can contain those that disparate perspective,
Hmm.
something that Southerners, I think, are really aware of.
Yeah.
So again, I want to ask you about the strategy of various characters' perspectives. Did that strategy also help to obfuscate the story's killer a little bit? And was that a part of the strategy in tackling a mystery? Because um, I noticed that there was something interesting about um, the characters that were named as suspects were also the characters whose perspectives you got to see directly. And so
Hmm.
by the as I was moving through it, I was like, huh, I have no idea who committed these murders. I thought
Hmm.
that strategy of showing all of those characters' perspectives was really effective at helping that feeling to arrive.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah, I didn't want to stay with Joe for the whole book because
mhm,
she's not a detective. She's only an amateur
mhm,
detective. And
mhm,
so I just wouldn't know what to do with her for 300, 270 pages.
mhm,
At one point, my editor said, maybe we should have her do some snooping around and stuff. And I was,
mhm,
and like fit some physical stuff to try to
mhm.
get information. Excuse me. And I said it won't work. She's 60 years old. She ain't climbing through windows. You know, she ain't snooping around the neighborhood, peeping in windows and stuff like that. So yeah, I felt that getting the different points of views allowed me to draw the book out, build the question of wait. So if she didn't do it, because I'm getting her point of view, and if she would have done it, she would have told the
Mhm,
reader she did it.
mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so I decided that I had to do multiple POVs. Otherwise, I think the book would have been 10 pages because
mhm.
Joe, like the information might have came to Joe too quickly, you know.
Right, right,
Hmm.
right.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
interesting the way that writers work through those sort of formal issues with a
Hmm.
text, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to ask also about the LGBTQ uh, angle of the novel, because it sort of really exerts um, a heavy pressure on this story, which I found really interesting. I guess, and this question will be two-pronged. I wanted to ask about the the strategy of looking at queer lives in Southern towns from a slanted perspective, because I feel like what was curious about Decent People and in West Mills to me, and the way that you approach LGBTQ themes in your Southern fiction, is maybe by looking at spectating the lives um, of those characters. So there was a sort of rhyme between Herschel and Valley from
Hmm.
West Mills. And so I was curious whether or not you recognize that as a strategy at all, and what do you find is most beneficial about approaching those stories and those lives from that angle?
Yeah, I think the reason why I do it I kind of, as you said, spectate those people from someone else's point of view
Mhm,
is because I have always been curious. I think a lot of this comes from some of my own experiences as a preteen and maybe
mhm,
even younger. I guess
mhm,
probably from the time that I became like that people could tell that I was gay.
mhm,
Which I think was probably as early as 9 or maybe
mhm,
even a
mhm,
little earlier. And so as I grew up, I was always worried about how people felt about me and
mhm,
what people thought about me. Straight people,
mhm,
mostly
mhm,
straight adults.
mhm,
more so than my peers even. And so I think the reason why I write about queer characters through somebody with someone else's lens is because of that curiosity of like, what does she or he think about this gay person?
Aha.
And do they want to right now, do they want to walk up to them and just push them? Or are they curious about the gay person and want to
Mhm,
talk to them and know about, their life? And
mhm.
so far, the reason why I haven't had a queer character have a point of view is because I'm so fascinated. And I don't think this is a good thing at all, but I'm so fascinated. I'm so fascinated by the the gaze, by the straight
Mhm,
gaze on us,
mhm,
And
mhm.
again, it's an unhealthy fascination, but it
Yeah,
it is there. It is there. I think
yeah.
with age though, I'm getting a little better and I care a little bit less about what straight folks think,
Yeah,
about my life.
yeah.
And so I do think that soon I think I will have a gay character with a queer character with a POV of their
I
own.
want to be on
Yeah,
the face. Yeah,
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 mhm,
yeah.
yeah,
That is so fascinating to hear you say that it comes from this sort of unresolved curiosity about the way that straight people see that character, because it almost feels like maybe that is a part of what drew you into writing,
mhm.
um, wanting to understand the perspective of someone else who was looking
Someone
at
else.
you, perhaps. Yeah. Wow.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
really interesting to,
yeah.
to think about. Um, Also, speaking of queer uh, adolescence and growing up, you spoke in an interview with Dr. Daniel Black, who's from Arkansas, of
Hmm.
creative writers working to heal a wound. And so I'm curious, has the wound you're writing to heal changed since marriage equality in 2011? And as a gay writer, have you noticed a difference in your zeal to write about the trauma of gay life? Um, and what strategies have you come up with to inspire you to keep writing n- as as it feels like some of the trauma that gay writers have been writing about for a while, if given the opportunity to be published, um, have changed somewhat since
Yeah,
2011. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I agree. It has changed, and I think I never say never, but I think that I may be done writing about queer tr- queer trauma. You know,
Mm,
um,
mhm,
I think I may be done. I feel like decent people said it all. Like
mhm,
I was kind of heavy handed. Like
mhm,
this kid has homophobic parents, you
mhm,
know, and like it
mhm.
can't get any worse, you
Yeah.
know, and so I think that what I might do going forward, not that queer characters won't have trauma, but I don't know that I want the trauma to be necessarily related to their queerness, you
Uh-huh.
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially it depends, with me writing so far historical, and then
Mhm.
the book I'm kind of drafting now is also set in the 80s. I can't
Uh-huh.
avoid homophobia altogether.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I don't want my queer characters being beat up just because they're queer. Like
Yeah.
if they're gonna be beat up, maybe give them some other reason somebody beating their ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know. So yeah, I think that I also recognize that a lot of queer writing now is not all about homophobia, and
Mhm.
I think that's a good thing. You have to include it because it's real,
Mhm.
but it
Mhm.
doesn't
Mhm.
mean that these queer people just walk around suffering from homophobia all day,
Right.
or at least explicit and in your face homophobia.
Right. Are,
Hmm.
are there any are there any queer writers, especially particularly gay writers, who you've read recently whose work seems to be escaping that sort of queer trauma? right now? Does anybody come to mind?
Let's see. I'm trying to think the last queer book. That's not the last one, but the one that pops up right
Mhm.
away is Yes Daddy by Jonathan Ramage, Page Ramage. I might reverse his name, his last name.
Charles and Lamont.
But
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Mhm,
His book was the kind of book I think we're talking about where of
mhm,
course there's some homophobia in it, you know,
mhm,
but the the drama, the tension is mostly between queer people, you know,
mhm,
around money and sex
mhm,
and
mhm,
stuff. That's the one that
mhm,
comes to mind. I know that I've read a few queer books this year, and I
mhm,
know that I thought, oh, it's not all about being gay bashed. But
mhm,
I'm drawing a blank.
mhm. Got
Yeah,
it, got it.
yeah.
Okay. Well, I also wanted to ask you specifically about your ideas about the legacy of Elin Harris, being that Six Bridges um, is, uh, it takes place and is sponsored in his hometown. I wanted to ask you. I know that Elin's work was particularly impactful to you, but also to, just a lot of young gay Black writers, myself included. And so I wanted to ask you, um, what do you think the legacy of Elin Harris's work is on your writing, particularly whether or not you felt like there was an impact as a storyteller? Because for
Mhm.
some reason, as I was reading Decent People, his name kept coming to mind. And I was like, huh, maybe there is something happening, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But then I heard you say how impactful Elin's work was, and so I was just curious whether or not you have been able to diagnose what his imprint on your work has been.
Not fully.
Okay.
I think that I was more just when his work was introduced to me, I think I was 20.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I was 19 or 20. And I think I
Hmm.
was just blown away because I had not heard of, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't know anything about James Baldwin at that
Hmm.
age, you know,
Hmm.
or maybe I had heard his name, but that was
Right,
all, you know.
right, right.
And so I was shocked that there was this man, this Black queer man who had written these books about queer men in Atlanta
And
and New
Southern too.
York. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, yeah.
Southern,
In
yeah,
Alabama, I think the part of the first book is set in
yeah.
Alabama, maybe.
Hmm.
And so I was just fascinated that someone had written about queer Black Southern men who were in college, who were
Hmm.
athletes and
Hmm.
all this
Hmm.
thing. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know yet if I do think I my language sometimes my language is similar
Hmm.
or emulates his in that it is not too not too sophisticated, but
Hmm.
like not too base either.
Hmm.
Like, you know,
Hmm.
I
You
think
strike just the right a level of readability that I just found comforting by the end of Decent People. Yeah.
that's what I was trying to say. That's the word I was looking
Mhm.
for. I was trying to make it readable for
Mhm.
adults and not feel like
Mhm.
it was written for 5 year olds, you know.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
you know, and I cannot pull off what like Toni Morrison does with language and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And so, you know,
Mhm.
but in
Mhm.
terms of characters and stuff, I don't think I have yet been influenced because I'm writing such um historical fiction. You know,
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
as I if I continue to write and if I move forward in time, I think there will be a time when I will be writing adult queer Black men in the various cities. And I think
Mhm.
that's when I'll really turn to his work
Mhm.
for teaching to learn.
Mhm.
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 Yeah,
Mhm.
but it was
Mhm.
purely my love for his work is largely because the stories are just good. And I saw
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
20, I think I was reading his books when I was kind of devouring them, I was like 20 to 27, you know, and I was just like, yes, I'm gonna go to college and get a degree and live in Atlanta and date a football player. A married football player.
That Elin Harris dream, baby.
Yeah.
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 Okay, we have about 15 minutes remaining. So I wanted to remind those who were joining us, or the attendees to the session, if you have any questions for De'Shawn, please make sure to drop them in the chat, and I will translate them to him here during the conversation. I guess I also wanted to ask De'Shawn about the mantle of writing historical fiction, and whether or not you feel burdened by it at all. Have you gotten to a place with working in West Mills in history, where you feel like, I want to do something that is contemporary now in the moment, and how do you handle that feeling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started writing a book that was set in 2018. And Frederick, let me tell you something. I don't know how to write about people using cell phones and stuff.
I was going to ask about that.
And texting and stuff, because I'm like, oh my God, if they text each other, do they ever go and see each other? Like, how am I going to make stuff happen if everything is on the phone, if they can just whip up their phones, you know?
Yeah.
And so what I ended up doing was I decided to put the project aside for now, but the present story is in 2018, but it spends a lot of time in the 80s, you know? But I'm like, you still can't avoid the present story of 2018, you know? So listen, the project scared me off. So I was like, I'm gonna put that one in the drawer.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna write me a nice old 1982 with no cell phones.
Give me some Evelyn Champagne King on the radio.
Right. Yeah.
Soul Train,
but I am ready. Right. Yeah, totally. I am ready though to write something contemporary. But I think that I have to pair it with, I think, a present story, contemporary present story with a historical backstory. I gotta have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Christadora by Tim Murphy, I think is the writer's name. If you haven't already. No. It's a grand sweeping novel about a particular building, I think, the Christadora in New York. But he looks at characters' perspectives from a couple of different eras. And so it seems like a strategy for healing that tension between wanting to set a novel in the present day, but also needing to sort of work through some of the past.
Yeah. One of these days, maybe book 50. It'll be a book set in 2050. You know?
Yeah. Respect.
Who knows?
Respect. I am looking in the chat to see whether or not there have been any questions added, but I do not see any as of yet, and so I will just continue to ask my own questions. But if you do have questions, please be sure to drop them in the chat. I don't want to neglect the audience's questions for you, De'Shawn, this evening. But you mentioning cell phone usage was interesting to me, because I was curious about how frightening it might be to be sort of working to avoid anachronisms, and and how do you make sure that your characters who are living in the 70s are not being bombarded by the technologies that happened after the current era of the novel.
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
just where a good editor comes in. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It was. I do remember my editor's assistant at one point wrote in the note, she said, well, wouldn't she just why does she walk why is she walking down the road to have this conversation? She could just call, And I was like, yeah, but like when you put two characters in front of each other in a room,
Mhm.
it changes how people say things and
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
and if you go in there to catch them in some shit, like a facial expression is going to give something away that you can't see over
Yeah.
the phone.
Totally.
But in 2020 or 2024, people gonna whip out their cell phone and do that FaceTime.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like,
Totally.
oh God. So
It made Joe's character in Decent People particularly interesting to me because there were those occasions where she would be confronting people in person. And
mhm,
I mean, me as a inhabitant of 2023, it just seemed frightening. And I was like,
right.
as a reader, I would have been terrified
Yeah.
um, to make my character do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I was really curious about that.
hmm
I'm also curious about the legacy of Toni Morrison. I know that Tony's work was really, or you really just enjoyed Tony's work.
Yeah.
I don't know whether or not, well, actually, I do see some resonances between um, your world building seems very similar. And so I was curious whether or not you could see any connections between yourself and Tony's work.
One thing that I have learned from Toni Morrison's work, and I try to implement it in my fiction,
Mm-hmm.
is this question she always, I think all of her books force us to ask about the good and evil debate, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so like Sula was the no, it wasn't. Beloved was the first of her novels that I read, and
Mm-hmm.
it was after seeing the movie first. And
Mm-hmm.
then I read the book, and that question of what's when Setha kills her children to
Mm-hmm.
save their lives, can we call that an act of evil?
Mm-hmm.
Or was it an act of good? And then in
Mm-hmm.
Sula, what's her name? Eva sets her son on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Was that an act of good, an act of evil? And
Mm-hmm.
so that is a question that I really enjoy
Mm-hmm.
teasing out in Toni Morrison's work. And so
Mm-hmm.
when I write, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to have a character do something that most people would think is bad, you know,
Right.
but some people are going to be like, no, she was looking out, you know.
Yeah.
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 So that's one of the things that, because if we use Eunice for an example,
Mm-hmm.
it's so bad that Eunice is taking her son to try to get him converted, you know. But people from this community would be like, no, she trying to make sure his life in the future is okay.
Right.
So
Right.
what if he got hypnotized? So what if he got beat up? Like if
Mm-hmm.
she was trying to make sure he lived to
Mm-hmm.
see adulthood. So I like to. That's the one thing from Toni Morrison's work that I try to do with my work. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that idea. Because it seems portable. You can carry
hmm
uh that question from novel to novel,
Yeah.
which is really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
hmm
Um,
hmm
I wanted to ask also about the South in particular, and um what did Decent People allow you to approach or work through or think about in a fresh way about Southern life in particular? I know you've been away for a while, so and are now back in Atlanta, I guess. So,
Yeah.
but you followed the migration trail north, as so many folks have.
Yeah.
And I'm curious whether or not have you discovered anything new or different about Southern life, especially when you think about um, the way that Southern towns deal with difference. Yeah.
hmm hmm You know, I have to say that, well, I wanted to address that very question in my work. Like, what is it like for a person who was born and raised in the South, lived
Mhm,
most of their life in the North, and then comes
mhm,
back and having to deal with these differences, right? About how people
mhm,
interact and all that stuff.
mhm,
Um, so I wanted to do that, and I wanted to tackle the very common issue, or yeah, issue, I guess, of the North, the homecomer versus the people who stayed.
mhm, mhm,
And I think the reason why that is so that that duality has been so interesting to me or fascinating to me is because I still, I moved away from North Carolina in 2003. What's that, 20 years? You know,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I still carry, it's lessening, but I still carry some guilt for having the gall to go and like try a new life, you
mhm,
know?
mhm,
And but get into a place where I'm like, I don't have to feel guilt about it. And so I
mhm,
wanted to see how other characters or people,
mhm,
how they deal with it. But you know, what I have learned in being back in the South, is that I do love the hospitality, and
mhm,
people say hello even here in Atlanta. You know,
mhm,
bustling town. If you're walking on the
mhm,
sidewalk and you get out of your car at the grocery store and another person is getting out, most of the time they're gonna nod their head or say
mhm,
something.
mhm.
And you don't get that in New York. And I lived in New York for so long that now I don't need that. But it is nice.
Right.
But I am sometimes concerned that even today, I feel like there are political and religious topics that is hard to have with a person in the South, because we are, a fellow person born in the South. We are church people, you know,
Mhm,
and
mhm,
I'm not religious. I haven't been, aside from a wedding or a funeral, I haven't been to
mhm.
a church service in probably 16 years, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
but
You
we
still,
are, yes,
mhm,
we
totally.
are church people. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
with almost every topic that comes up, there's a little moment when you're like, but with God like that, you know?
Mhm,
But
mhm.
with God like our perspective on that topic, you know?
Yeah. Okay, I have a question in the chat,
Sure.
De'Shawn. Angela asks, what is one of the most intriguing things you discovered when doing your research to write about your characters, aside from learning the gentleman was a Klansman?
hmm I I based a lot of my characters on people that I know. And so what I do is I just kind of transpose those people to the time period, you know?
Interesting. Yeah.
Um, yeah. And some of these characters are an amalgamation of like five people I know, like Marion Harmon, even though she is a woman, she is made up of like two men and a woman I know, you
Oh,
know?
wow. Wow.
Yeah. And so, and they're not all family members. Some of these
Mhm,
are like people who were my teachers in
mhm,
middle school, or the principal in middle
mhm,
school, some lady at church,
mhm,
and
mhm.
or people at church. And so I don't know that I have to research characters, but where the research comes in is the transposing them from the period I knew them in and taking them to 76 or whatever the year,
Wow.
because I didn't come along till 79. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I know what she or he would say now, or I know what would have said to me in 1999, but how would they have communicated that to me in 76? You know?
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
that's where the work kind of comes in, the research work.
Yeah. That is so
Mhm.
fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're at 7:29. De'Shawn, thank you so much again for offering up your time and attention this evening.
You're
Um,
welcome.
Congratulations on the second novel.
Thank
And
you.
we're hoping to see many more. Those novels, again, are available for purchase through our independent bookstore sponsors, both Pyramid Art Books and Custom Framing and Wordsworth Bookstore here in Little Rock. Both of them, you're able to purchase the book through their websites, links of which are in the conversations chat. So with that, we are going to wrap for the evening. De'Shawn, it was great to see you, brother. All the
Yes,
best.
good seeing you. Thank you. Thank
Mhm.
you so much for having me.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.